So my name is Alex Stuart, and I'm the local biodiversity coordinator for the North East Scotland Biodiversity Partnership. So you can see my funding partners just at the side over here. I've got a couple of housekeeping things to get out of the way just before we begin. So I've covered filming. There shouldn't be any fire drills this morning, so if the fire alarm does sound, if you make your way through that door, there's another set of doors through there, and there's a muster point just at the back of the building. Toilets are directly across from the reception desk, just through the first door, back where you got your badge. So now that is done, I would like to formally welcome everyone to this event. I'm really thrilled with the turnout here today and about the range of people coming along this morning. So I'd like to welcome all the council staff here today, not just from the 3 councils that the partnership covers, but from different councils as well. We also have some councillors in attendance today, so welcome to them. Other organisations here today include SEPA, SNH and the SRUC, as well as a wide range of community groups, which are too many to name, so welcome to everyone. For those not familiar with the partnership, we were one of the first 4 pilot partnerships formed back in 1996. Our members are drawn from local government, environmental organisations and wildlife charities, all working together to deliver local action for biodiversity. So for over 20 years, the partnership has worked to promote, protect and improve the environment, and collaboration has always been at the heart of our working, so that's why I'm very thrilled that we have lots of different people here today. Now, so far 2019 has been a year in which public awareness of problems such as climate change and biodiversity loss has greatly increased. There is recognition of the fact that we cannot just continue with business as normal and watch as our nature declines irreversibly. Councils, farmers, businesses, community groups and individuals all have a role to play in combating the loss of our nature. So I'll start with the bad news. So I'm sure you'll all be aware of the dramatic decline of our pollinating insects due to factors such as habitat loss, fragmentation, pesticide use and climate change. And there were figures came out earlier this year which said that we have lost 1/3 of our British bees and hoverflies. Well, they're in decline since 1980, with only the generalist species being able to survive. So we are losing our insect biodiversity. You may be less aware that in the UK, we've already lost the majority of our species-rich grassland. A quote from the charity Plant Life says, it took around 6,000 years to create the species-rich grassland for which the UK is globally famous. Yet in less than a century, we have lost 97% and counting. So we're losing our wildflower biodiversity, and these 2 problems are linked. So what needs to be done? We need to create and restore areas of flower-rich grassland, the habitats that supply our pollinating insects with food as well as homes. These areas need to be connected. So areas of grassland need to be connected to form networks. This allows insects the ability to move to different areas so they don't become isolated and more vulnerable. And I've put a picture up there of a bug life project called Beelines, showing different connected pollinator areas throughout the UK. And you'll notice that there's a gap where we are in Scotland just now. Finally, very importantly, we need to start now. So the good news, you can reverse this loss, and this can be done on a variety of scales, from your garden at home to the park beside you, the business where you work, to the roads spanning the northeast. And the benefits are enormous, and I could spend a lot of time talking about them, but very briefly, we are going to be increasing the number and diversity of pollinating insects, which is great for our food production in a number of ways. There's benefits for other wildlife as well, with around 1/5 of priority conservation species being associated with grassland. We also have other benefits, including carbon sequestration, reduced flooding, improving air and water quality, and last but not least, a reduction in costs, and that's for money, time and energy for species-rich grassland as opposed to close-mown ryegrass. So what I'd like to see is moving away from this close-mown ryegrass that has very few insects and very few plant species around in there, to something like this. So flower-rich grassland that supports an abundance of life. And this morning, I'm delighted to be able to host 2 speakers. Firstly, we're going to have Giles Laverack joining us from Scotia Seeds, which is the leading producer of wildflower seeds in Scotland. The partnership has been working with Giles this year to provide community groups with a range of wildflower seed mixes, and Giles' support and advice has been invaluable. Giles will be covering why local origin seed is important and how local it should be, as well as briefly introducing the idea of seed zones and the importance of traceability with wildflower seed. Secondly, we'll have Dr. Phil Stuart joining us from Butterfly Conservation all the way down in Dorset. Phil was the Principal Ecological Advisor at Dorset County Council for 25 years. For 4 of those years, Phil looked after the whole of the council's countryside service, including parks, nature reserves and road verges. He and his team pioneered changes in the way that the council's green spaces were managed. Now, just a quick note, in order to make the most of our time this morning, I'm going to ask that we keep all questions to the very end of Phil's talk, when we'll have time set aside for this. And also after then, I'd like to invite you to stay behind for about half an hour so that you can have more informal discussion, and the 2 speakers will be there ready and willing to talk to you there as well. So without any further ado, I'd like to move on to Giles just now. Okay, so just need to...
Thank you very much, Alex. Alex and Phil have very kindly asked me to say a wee bit about wild origin seed and what you should look for if you're thinking of using seeds to create meadows or other types of habitats. This is potentially a very big subject, so I'm not going to attempt to cover it all in 10 minutes or to and really just to introduce it. So the first thing to say really is that, of course, the environment is very variable, and even within Great Britain or the UK, we have big differences in environment. So this is just a map of the mean average July temperature, and it's no surprise to realise that it's warmer in the southeast of England in the summer than it is in northeast Scotland. So that's one factor. There are other things involved in the environment for plants and animals. So, for example, the geology, which can be very different across the country, and that, of course, has an influence on the soils in which plants are growing, and a big effect on plants and animals. So, naturally, different species live in different places. That's the first thing to say. For example, salad burnet, which is a common grassland species throughout much of England, is really not very common in Scotland. Doesn't really make it much north of the border, only to a few sites where it would be recognised as a native plant. So the native populations are marked in blue, and the red ones are places where it can be found, but it's not regarded as a native. It's been introduced there. So there is one place where it's been recorded in northeast Scotland, but we wouldn't regard that as a native. And it's worth checking these distributions if you're using seeds and getting them from a supplier, because you may not want to introduce something which is not native. It's kind of a choice, really. But also there tends to be very often quite a strong southern bias in the seeds that people are supplying, just simply because most of the people who are supplying seeds are based further south, and they tend to have collections from around their own areas. There are lots of sources of seeds that have come in to Great Britain from other places. People have used wildflower seeds from North America, for example, which might be native species in North America, but not necessarily in Europe, and quite possibly not in Britain or Scotland. We've had a lot of seed coming in over the years from continental Europe, from the Czech Republic, and particularly places in Eastern Europe, and that probably still continues. But also within Great Britain, there has been a lot of movement of seed from the south to the north, and there are various reasons for that, but one is certainly that the environment, those nice warm temperatures for seed production, is better further south, so it's just easier to produce seeds in the south. And sometimes we've also seen agricultural varieties being used, so that they might be the right species. They might be native species, things like bird's foot trefoil, but their populations have been selected for agriculture for better yield or better performance in an agricultural situation, and they're not native populations, and they can be very different. So, what are the possible problems then with moving seeds over long distances? One problem is quite obviously the movement of pests and diseases that are sometimes associated with seeds, or with plants, and we've seen a recent example of that in the ash dieback problem, and you can see other problems of that nature that have come in with plant material. So that is one reason for limiting the movement of plants, whether they're growing plants or seeds. And the different environments will produce different populations, so there will be genetic differences as the plants evolve to adapt to their own conditions. So this pair of photographs is of two populations of bluebell, wild hyacinth, which are growing on the same site, and they're photographed on the same day in spring. And one is from an English population and the other is from a Scottish collection. And there's obviously a big difference in flowering time, which is quite typical of populations that are collected from a wide distance, particularly at different latitudes. So the consequence of this is if you are in northeast Scotland and you use an English population, it may flower earlier than local populations would normally flower, and the bees that pollinate this species and other insects and animals that use it are likely to be adapted to the local populations and not to something that is flowering earlier. So if you're a bee in Aberdeenshire and your only local source is going to be say an English population which is flowering early, by the time you've emerged and you're ready and the temperatures are warm enough for you to fly and pollinate, you may have missed this population. So there may not be such a benefit to local populations of insects that are adapted to the local plant populations. So it's important to have some evidence for this sort of thing as well. And there are not all that many studies of this, but there's a nice one from Germany, and it's quite reasonable to think that the same sort of situation might be happening in Britain. So this one's from the Journal of Applied Ecology, which is published by the British Ecological Society. And what they did is they used the seed zones which have been developed in Germany, and they took collections from each of these zones, and they planted the collections in 4 sites, and then looked at what happened. And what they found was that seed from local origins grew better if you were within the zones. It would produce greater biomass, and probably survive better as well. They didn't really look at long-term survival, but in the short term, produces more and just grows better. They produce more flowers, so they're more attractive for insects, and also more attractive for people as well, if that's one of your objectives. And the other thing was that they flowered at the right time for the local insect populations. And even within Germany, they found that there were differences of 17 to 23 days difference in flowering. So that's quite a lot, really, for insect populations, 3 weeks or so. And the other thing they found was that seed from other zones never performed better. So if you were moving seed from one zone into another, it was never likely to be better than the local material. And as you got further away, as you increased the distance, the performance reduced even further. So we can think about that in our own sort of context in Britain and in northeast Scotland. Quite a few European countries have created what they call seed transfer zones, and the idea of these is that you just limit the movement of seeds to within these zones, and this is increasing. So probably more countries will develop this. In Great Britain, we do have a system for tree seeds, for native tree seeds. It doesn't really quite apply necessarily in the same way to herbaceous species, to wildflowers and grasses, but it is increasingly being used. And I put some X's on these these zones, which indicate the locations of some of the major producers of native seeds in Great Britain. And you see most of them are located further south in a different zone from the one that we're in. So, very simply, the main message is that seed origin is important for the success of the plants. It's important for the success of pollinators too. And if you know your origins, and you know where the seed you're using is coming from, then you can make a choice about whether you want to move seed around over a long distance or focus on keeping seed from a more local supply. And that applies whether you're producing it yourself or whether you have the opportunity to get seed from other people, other councils, or organizations or companies that are producing seed. So that's really the main message that I would like to give you, and I'll be here for the rest of the morning and also tomorrow participating in the Aberdeenshire workshop. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, lovely, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for welcoming me north of the border. I had a 12-hour journey to get here yesterday, and brilliant just coming through. You really do begin to feel that difference in kind of climate and the way we are, and I think it just shouts loud and clear. It's a very long way from what I'm going to be talking about to here. So what I'm after trying to do you want to get the mics?
Can you hear at the back?
Yeah, I did wonder. How are you? Is that okay?
No, if you can use it, it would be better.
It'd be better. So if I'm about
It
like
needs to go quite up. To
quite
your-
high, that better?
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, right. I'll stick with that then. Thank you. Right, and if it starts whistling, just wave a hand and let me know. Great. So it just speaks very nicely to what Giles has just been saying, just how important it is to think about this, because we are in a position where I think there's a change happening. I think this year in particular, we're all concerned. The fact there's a full audience here suggests to me that we are at a bit of a turning point with the environment. It's even politically acceptable to be talking about it during the election, for heaven's sake. I mean, that is quite remarkable. How depressed were we all at the last election only 2 years ago, when nothing was spoken about environment and what we were going to do? Now look at it. So could be at a turning point now where it really does matter where we get our seeds from and the types of management we're going to do. And I'm going to be talking to you about management. So what I'm going to be talking to you about is managing our green spaces and the experience that I gained while I was working for 25 years at Dorset County Council, that's now become Dorset Council Unitary Authority. And in particular, for half of the talk, about the last 4 years before I just had to leave because it was too stressful, where I was put in charge of managing the whole of the green space services, which included the road verges. But before I nearly fell off my mortar coil, I did, I think, some really quite interesting things. And I want to share that with you because I think it's important. And I think it matters and can be done here, just as it can be done in southern England. I now work for Butterfly Conservation on this Building Sites for Butterflies project, which is all about promoting that message, promoting the work that I established in Dorset while I was there. And I got really frustrated every time I left the county boundary because I saw opportunities being missed. And before I retire, I want to share that with you because I think we can all make a difference. So I hope that today is a bit of optimism. It's not all bad news out there and we can all do something about it. Right. Multiple values of green spaces. These days, we recognise that our green spaces, the very bits of green grass that we've all travelled here along the roads to see, that are mown God knows how many times, have got multiple values. And what we're not doing is recognising and realising those values. So, you know, it's not just about flooding and temperature change and control and air quality. Biodiversity is really important. And what I'm going to focus on today is the ability to be able to create biodiversity effectively out of nothing, out of mown grass, because we really can do it. And it's remarkably simple and surprisingly effective. So there are a whole range of benefits that green space provides, and we need to be out there trying to do our level best at whatever scale we're able to operate to make these green spaces work harder for us in the built environment. I'm not going to be talking about the farmed environment. This is about the very green spaces that most of us in public services live and work around and manage. What I am not promoting, though, today is that sort of thing. It's just the best thing to do is just to let it grow. I mean, there is and I applaud them for it over in Northern Ireland, the Don't Mow, Let It Grow campaign. The problem with Don't Mow, Let It Grow, and everybody who works for local government in here will understand that, is you get complaints. That's all that happens. What a nightmare. Okay, so we're not going to be doing that, because not only do you get complaints, but the poor staff who've then got to go at the end of the year and try and manage that have not got the resources to do it. The mowers will not cope with it. And then what do we do with the mess that's left at the end of it? So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a solution that overcomes that. Okay? What I'm also not talking about is that. However pretty it looks, those pictorial meadow mixes that were brought to the fore in the Olympics, they were fantastic, weren't they? Watching there at the Olympic Park, absolutely stunning. Any good for wildlife? I'm afraid not. You know, it's sad. I mean, plant life have just produced some stats, isn't it? About 40 species of insect will pollinate, will gather pollen or nectar from pictorial mixes. 1,400 will gather from our native flora. So it's a really important thing to be trying to go as native as possible. There is not one species of butterfly or moth that gathers pollen, because they don't by and large, or nectar from poppy. If you think of wild poppy, you think of it as a native species. It's an archaeophyte. It's been here for a very long time, but it's not part of our native flora. So it's really important that we think about these things before we rush out there and make it look pretty. Making things look pretty isn't necessarily good for wildlife. Okay? It can help. It can be part of that journey, but you are heading towards native perennial wildflowers if you want to maximize biodiversity. But what I am talking about is an ecological approach. And this ecological approach is understand what makes grass grow. Because when you understand what makes grass grow, you might be able to control that. And if you can control the amount it grows in the first place, you'll have less to cut. If you've got less to cut, it should cost us less. And we can all go off and spend more interesting things doing with our time than just cutting grass. And it automatically happens that if you can reduce the amount the grass grows, you will increase the amount of wildflowers because you increase that space for them to thrive in. It's very, very simple. So we should be able to work hand in hand with reducing the ability of the grass to grow at the same time as increasing the wildflowers. And I'll explain how. And much of this is about a response, isn't it? We're responding for all sorts of reasons. When I was taking charge of the green space service in the county council in Dorset, this was much about a response to austerity. And I recognise for particularly Aberdeenshire Council, that's also the case now, is that you're facing big cuts. And when you're looking at how you divide up money, I have to say most of green space services are part of that Cinderella service. Most of the money goes to people-based services. It has to. That's because the demands are well outstripping the supply for social care, etc. But for place-based services, for parks and open spaces and rights of way, it's much harder to secure that money. Well, as an ecologist, I came in to try and ease the path through that. And so from my point of view, it was austerity. But it could be part of your climate emergency plan. It could be part of carbon reduction targets. Indeed, parts of the country is to do with topsoil conservation. Why on earth are we putting topsoil onto green spaces when we don't need it, when our farmers are desperate for it because they've lost most of it? We haven't got to that position yet where we're able to say we've got the Inverness to Aberdeen, the new A96, the revised. I bet we cover it in topsoil. Not if I have anything to do with it, but I would want that soil to be useful where it can be used to grow things for us to eat. And the corridor of the road is for biodiversity because that's the right place for it. And it's all about what we do with our topsoil. And it could be a whole range of things, including loss of biodiversity itself. We want to put something back into society. So north of the border, what am I talking about? Well, there are some relatively common species of butterfly or species that are now spreading north. Orange tip, for instance. When I was a wee lad, there weren't any orange tips in Scotland. Now pretty much everywhere, as I understand it. What a lovely butterfly to have on your doorstep. Well, yeah, but can't we have some more? Wouldn't it be nice to have them absolutely everywhere and abundantly and commonly in our green spaces? We can do that. And then that we fell right on the I'm always after the small, dark, miserable moths. Small, dark yellow underwing moth. There's a species that's on Bearbury, and it's kind of Banffshire and Aberdeenshire, Morayshire. That's where it lives in this part of the world, and it needs Bearbury, but it needs Bearbury growing on bare ground with nice lot of sunshine. Well, we can create that on road verges. But this species is really in decline at the moment, and yet there's this massive opportunity in our green spaces to be able to provide something for it. So lots of opportunities out there for individual rare species, as well as this range of wider biodiversity. Right, so can we control grass growth? And the answer is yes, of course we can. There are some things we can do nothing about. It rained a bit in Aberdeenshire last week, I understand. By the way, it's also rained throughout most of southern England as well. It's been miserable this autumn. Not much we can do about rain. Not much we can do about sunshine. It comes and goes. And indeed temperature. But certainly from where I come, temperature is one of those things that's changing under a climate change. When I started 27 years ago in the county council, we were strimming cemeteries from April towards the end of October. It's now mid-March to mid-December in southern England. And that steady increase in the amount of mowing. So the pressure is for more mowing just at a time when we've got fewer resources to put into it. What's the solution? Well, the solution is all about soil fertility. If we understand and work with, manipulate soil fertility and effectively reduce it, the amount of grass that grows reduces. And it's no more complicated than that. But let's have a look at some of the effects. So this is a picture I took earlier this year, just not far from my house. It was where my former engineering colleagues in Dorset Council kind of ran out of topsoil. They ran out of topsoil on the right, and they had plenty of it on the left. This is a picture taken in April, so the end of April, when that's the time the mowers are out there on force, aren't they? And we have all the mowers are up and down there mowing things and spreading the grass cuttings everywhere. On the left, yes, it needs mowing. On the right, it does not need mowing. And it's a simple effect of that is soil fertility absolutely controls the amount grass grows. And you'll also notice on the left, 2 dandelions, and on the right, a load of daisies. I'm not saying that's massive biodiversity increase, but it tells you everything you need to know. Is that in areas with high soil fertility, you get lots of grass, lots of thug plants that suck up that nutrient. And in low fertility, you get areas where a bit more space for things to germinate. And that low fertility just encourages that. It's as simple as that. And the great thing about low fertility is you're working with that grain of nature. Our very best grassland wildlife sites are always on those soils which are least fertile. And those can be highly man-made, the Calaminarian grasslands of the Midlands. So those are the old mine tips and those poisonous tips there, which are covered in wildflowers because nothing else can survive there. So sometimes that's at really poor soils are really, really good for wildlife. And yet we think when we're creating our greenscapes, we've got to cover things in topsoil to give it that green cover so the day the scheme opens, the mayor can come out there, clip the tape, and it's all beautifully managed. Some poor sod has got to look after that forever after that. If, on the other hand, you've thought about that long-term cycle of how much does it cost to create, how much does it cost to maintain, we will be in a much better position to be able to design these things right at the outset. So, designing at the outset, I know you haven't got much of this stuff up here. This is chalk, by the way, for those who, but chalk, this is my playground, and it's dead easy to create things with chalk, but you can do exactly the same in limestone, sand, gravel. You can even do it in clay. It's just bare mineral. That's what we're after. But given I had the opportunity, why wouldn't I? And for this was the Weymouth Relief Road. This was a scheme created just before the Olympics where Weymouth was hosting sailing events, and ta-da, the government suddenly lobbed 90 million quid into the hands of Dorset Council to go and create a nice road so people could get down there hassle-free. It kind of worked, but it was a brilliant playground for me in terms of being able to design in the biodiversity gain that I really wanted. And part of that was either no topsoil or very, very little. The maximum amount of topsoil allowed on any of those slopes was 15 millimeters. Normally you would have 150 mil or 300 mil or sometimes 600 mil of topsoil. Not a bit of it. 15 millimeters, that's a scattering. And this is all within the Dorset area of outstanding natural beauty. This is all that high risk. We don't want bright white scars across our wonderful natural environment. Trust me, I'm an ecologist. Anybody do that? But you have to, don't you? I think you do need to trust yourselves. You do know this ecosystem and you can work with it. But we never do it. We are kind of stuck in this cycle of constantly putting topsoil on things and sowing it with grass seed and mowing it forever without really understanding what we're doing. Anyway, I got away with it here. Fantastic. So either no topsoil. I'd much prefer no topsoil at all because it gives you a huge window, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years before you need to start intervening. In the meantime, full of wildflowers, absolutely full of wildflowers and no management needed. On the other hand, where you've got some topsoil, at least you're going to get something growing quickly. Now, wildflower seeding. Mostly locally supplied from the southwest of England, and I was very keen to make sure that. The rest of it was hand collected by me, so that was kidney vetch and horseshoe vetch, and the orchid species, bee orchids and pyramidal orchids, hand collected by me. You don't need much. You don't need much to go out there and do this. Oh, indeed, the Viper's bugloss I collected myself. And just let nature take its course, but get something on there. But some of these species are hand-picked to be pioneer species, because if you are going to open a big scheme, it's got to look decent on day one. Well, what does decent look like? Okay, I think that's decent, isn't it? That's 18 months. That's not actually day one when the road opens. I mean, if the road opened in December, it's not going to look great, is it? But this is 18 months after the scheme opened. That was what people were driving past. Now, I defy anybody to think that that looks untidy, messy, terrible. It looks absolutely fantastic. And I was surprised. I have to say, I thought it would look barer than that. But kidney vetch, which is the main yellow thing in there, that is a pioneer species. It likes bare ground. Trust your ecologists to be able to hand-pick the seeds for the scheme. Kidney vetch does grow up here too, but I bet there's a phenotypic difference between the flowering times in southern Britain and here. So if you go out to the east coast on the dunes, you've got quite a lot of kidney vetch. So if I were doing a kidney vetch scheme here, I'd want some locally sourced kidney vetch for this part of the world. But you can do it, and it should be done. And it will grow on sand and clay and limestone and chalk. It will grow on most things. It's an abundant plant on the road verges up in the Outer Hebrides. You know, we've got our sources here, and yet this wee butterfly, small blue, is in massive decline nationally. No wonder, because we're getting rid of the plant. We don't think about it in our seed sources, and this is a critical species. The butterfly is not in the northwest on the Outer Hebrides, but it is up here, all the way up into Sutherland, up at Coole, where there's a sensible population of this species all the way up the east coast, wherever that plant is. And it's really important that we think it doesn't have to be coastal. It could be inland on south-facing road verges, just as it is in Weymouth. And this species, it even arrived before the 2012, literally 6 months after the scheme started. So within 6 months of spreading the seed, the first flowers attracted small blue, and they were coming from 4 miles away. That's the nearest known colony. That's a considerable distance for a tiny butterfly that we think of. We need lots of stepping stones 100 meters apart. Oh, go on, trust them. They've got wings, they can fly, and they do. Now, what's happening to those populations now, crikey O'Reilly, is that gradually, very gradually, this population is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is on a road verge. So we've now got something that you'd have to describe it as a nationally important population. I don't really know what that means. It's just that wherever we create habitat for small blue butterfly in most of Britain, the butterfly turns up and it starts building its populations. That's restoration. That's easy to do, and it costs very, very little. I hand collected seed. Right, so what does it look like now then, that road? This is 2019. Still looking pretty smart. This is all horseshoe vetch now. There's a lot of kidney vetch amongst it, but horseshoe vetch, which is a chalk grassland species, doing extremely well. And that apparently is really difficult to germinate. Not in my experience. Just chuck it out on the bare chalk and leave it a year or so, and nature will sort it out. And it's now abundant across there. And there are about 140 species of plant that are now thriving across the road scheme, including those orchid species, bee orchids and pyramidal orchids. But they're not where I thought they'd be. I thought they might turn up all over the chalk, over that bare chalk, covered in orchids. Not a bit of it. They prefer the slightly damper sands and clays. Really? But they're there in their tens of thousands in certain areas where you've got a slightly different geology. So yeah, we don't know everything, and particularly orchids, pretty fickle. But just get the seed out there, try it and see what happens. I mean, there are northern marsh orchid populations around Glasgow, aren't there? Out on the Verges, out in Glasgow. Well, you know, come on, we can do this. You know, northern marsh orchid, what a stunning plant! Absolutely, wouldn't that be fantastic to have all the way into the centres of our populations? People kind of, it lifts the spirit, doesn't it? Right. And those from our point of view in southern Britain, you won't get, it'll be a long bit of climate change before we get these up here. But Adonis blue on the left and chalk hill blue on the right. Adonis blue arrived really quickly. That was in 2013. Chalk hill blue's only recently arrived in 2018. And that's probably had 11 miles minimum to disperse. But it's arrived there and its population is starting to build. Very much against the trend, where in the west part of its range in Britain, including Dorset, populations are collapsing. And yet it's turned up here and seems to be increasing. There's some story behind that, and that's for another time. But you know, we really can, even on road verges, create something really important. Right, that's my motto. If you build it, they'll come. So across that Weymouth Relief Road, so this is creation. In the last under 10 years, we've had 30 species of butterfly recorded. And for those of you who are nerdy, you'll know there are 59 species in this country, resident. So that is over half the species of British butterfly have now been seen on 7 hectares of road verge in Dorset, totally artificially created in the last 10 years. We can put biodiversity back into our countryside, and we can put it back into our green spaces, but we need to learn how to do it. So that's the creation side of it. And for those who are interested in the costs, this saves us money. Not having to drag the topsoil up from the topsoil store up and smear it all over over those slopes, saved over £250,000, just like that. Each scheme will depend on where the soil is and what you've got to do. And for many schemes, there's too much topsoil. We've got too much of the stuff. So your soil specialists say, oh, we've got to put it back because we don't know what to do with it. I don't want to bury it, but I do think that is a perfectly good solution until we can at least put it somewhere more useful. But I do think burying topsoil is one of the good things we can do in big schemes. The aftercare, really interesting on aftercare. How much do we spend on spraying out spear thistles and ragworts and dock and all that? We spend an awful lot of money in that first 5 years of aftercare of any scheme. Look at the new planting schemes with the tubes and the stakes and the trees and all the rest of it. If you planted those in subsoil, I promise you those trees will grow, and they might take a bit longer, but you will not have to put any chemical on those because there's no dock and thistle and the rest of it in subsoil. It's clean. It's never seen the light of day, so it has no seed in it. Well, that's surely the simplest and easiest way to avoid spraying in new schemes is don't use topsoil. The only reason we had to use any on the Weymouth Relief Road was where I had put 15 mil of topsoil. You did get a reasonable amount of growth of dock. But it's all gone now because there's virtually no nutrient left in that system. And the annual maintenance has, of course, collapsed from quite expensive to almost nothing. There's nothing to do. If you've got a you've got a landscape that's got no soil on it and it's just growing wildflowers, they don't grow very tall, so they're never a safety risk. They look nice. And if you leave them unmanaged, all the butterflies and moths and all the other invertebrates have got all that overwintering stages and they're in fine fettle. So no wonder the butterfly populations are rising because you've created a system sustainable. And that's the good bit. And then cheekily, I managed to include grazing fences at the bottom of the slopes. So every now and again, the farmer will lob in some sheep. We've had about 8 weeks grazing in 8 years, something like that. And it just keeps a bit of the stuff down. But it's not really that necessary. My guess is you could get away with 20 years of no management whatsoever, other than perhaps a bit of budlier pulling. Compare that with how much management. Look at my first slide there. That was a Midlands road scheme, you know, with all those straight lines of mowing. Compare that. We could be doing nothing for 20 years or mowing every year, twice a year for 20 years. Come on, it's an obvious saving. Right, now on to the bit about road verges that are existing. These are slightly hammed up. That one on the left is a particularly bad road verge, but that had 300 mil of topsoil on it, put on there by a utility company after they'd finished the works. That's what they're statutorily required to do. Nobody thinks about the poor guys who've got to go and manage that afterwards, but that's what happens when budgets are cut, grass grows, and there's no money to cut it, and so you end up with long grass. There's then a safety risk. So that's what happens if you cut and leave, which is what normally happens over most of the United Kingdom. We just cut and leave the vegetation where it lies. And when you do that, the nutrients that are in that cut bit get recycled into the soil. Okay, so that builds the fertility very slowly. You also get nutrients coming in from rain and from vehicle exhausts. So you will be always building very slowly the nutrient system. And that's why if you look at a curb line, when engineers build roads, they put in a curbstone and they level the soil flat. Go back in 10 or 15 years and it'll be at least an inch or two above that. And that's because that ecosystem is building its own soil above that, because you're adding nutrients all the time. And so you end up with a kind of a curve down to the curbstone. It doesn't have to be that way if you understand the ecosystem that's driving that. On the right-hand side is the alternative, and that's cut and remove, cut and lift, cut and collect, whatever you want to call it. This part of the world tends to be cut and lift. So cut and lift, if you get the timing right, removes the nutrients, because the plants are drawing nutrients up into the growth, into the leaves, into the flowers and seeds. And if you take that away, that can't go back into the soil. So you're reducing the fertility of the existing soil beneath where those plants were growing. And when you do that, that then reduces the amount the grass grows the following months and indeed in the following years. So if you move from cut and leave, where nutrients will slowly build, to cut and collect, once you move into cut and collect, the amount of cut and collect determines whether the nutrients are going to go down or they're going to remain stable. But they're very unlikely to go up under a cut and collect system. So that's the control that you need, and that puts you in charge of the budgets and the biodiversity, and I'll show you how. So that's the simplest cut and collect. And I have to say, I don't advocate that to any council, getting your staff to go around after they've mown it, raking it all up and taking it away. But I did make my staff do it because I needed to show on a very small scale that this system was going to work. So I challenged them. Leave it long, cut it, take it away, and tell me next time when you go and mow that grass, is it easier or more difficult? And every one of them said it was easier to mow. And of course it is, because you've removed the thatch that was building up on all of that grass that was being cut and left, and you're opening up the sward, and you're taking away coarse grasses, and the grasses that survive afterwards tend to be the fine grasses, and those are easier to cut. Oh, I didn't quite know it would be this good, but it is. We all like a piece of kit though, don't we? So it's about probably getting a decent bit of machinery to create to do something good with that material. You know, being able to go there and cut and remove it efficiently. So, I mean, you look at the length of that grass. Could you realistically, in most parts of Britain, get away leaving the grass that long? The complaints start coming in. Absolutely do. We'll come to the publicity and public campaign in a bit. But actually, over most of Dorset, where cut and collect now is in those urban areas, and it is mainly in the urban areas this is happening, if you let the grass get that long, and maybe you get 1 or 2 complaints coming in, that's the moment to go and cut it, because you're removing the maximum amount of nutrients out of the tall grass. And look at the finish you leave. It's beautiful. There's no mess, and it now looks, so for those who like it neat and tidy, cut and collect is the perfect system. Now, not only that, what's this chap up to? This 3-man team we used to send out mowing, a driver, a strimmer banksman, and somebody constantly blowing grass around the environment. Oh my Lord, how much carbon footprint is wasted on blowing grass from road back onto verge, from path onto verge. Oh, please. Not needed under cut and collect. So we've moved from a 3-man team to a 2-man team for our grass verge maintenance. So that person who's hanging around there up against the fence has now got something more interesting to do in their life. Thank the Lord for that. So how do we get that system to work? Because what I'm not advocating is everywhere you suddenly start moving into cut and collect, because it's quite hard work. There's a lot of political capital involved in getting to that stage where it's got to work, and there are various things that have got to be aligned. The first thing is you've got to understand how to reduce the fertility and how quickly you can do it. So what we've got here is, this is a clay verge. So this is not one of my nice chalk verges. This is boring agricultural clay to create a verge between a road and a new cycleway. And that was the standard 150 mil of topsoil and sown with a standard grass mix. And in 1 year, in 2017, I told the staff to go there and cut and collect it 3 times. In April, towards the end of April, in July, and again in early September. But don't do it until the grass has got long, so you remove the maximum amount of nutrients. The following year in May, that's what that grass verge looked like. So it had not been cut in April. Now you remember back to my slide which showed what the grass was like in April, long, where it's fertile. Instantly you've changed the fertility of that soil, so the tall grasses, the thugs, the cocksfoots and the false oat grasses and the rest are going to struggle under those circumstances, and you end up with more of a balance of smaller bits of cocksfoot and a whole load of fine grasses of bents and fescues, and it's much easier to mow, and there's less to mow, and look, there's a load of common daisies in there as well. And it's remarkable how quick this change can be, moving from cut and leave to cut and collect. That's just down the verge from the last shot. And that shows where on the left is a standard cut and leave up against the hedgerow. And you can see there this is in June, where the false oat grass has now got to its standard, 2 foot, 2.5 foot high. The false oat grass covers most of Britain. God, it's an ugly grass, and it's a pain. It's quite hard to mow. It's tough. And yet this is the cut and collect on the right-hand side, either side of the cycleway, where it had been cut and collect 3 times. This is the shot in May. It doesn't even need mowing. The visibility across the road at that crossing point doesn't need any management at all. There is no safety risk, and you've already got some common wildflowers coming in here, without doing anything. It's an amazing system when it gets going. And here's how you can artificially enhance it. So here was a very dull piece of mown grass, of which there are presumably thousands, if not millions, of square meters across Britain. And it was an area that was getting mown 5-6 times a year, just gang mown and left. We did the 3 cut and collects in 2017, and then after the last cut and collect, sowed it with just 4 species of wildflower. Yellow rattle, because I like the parasitic effect that yellow rattle has on grasses. Common knapweed, oxeye daisy, and birdsfoot trefoil. Nothing too complex, just a very basic, relatively cheap mix. And then left it under cut and collect regime the following year with 2 cut and collects, one early and one in end of August. And then this year, that was the result. You've converted what was pretty dull, boring mown amenity grass into little nature reserves. And you've given it a nice, neat haircut round the edge for those who are massively keen on being tidy. And that is important. And public reaction is really important here, and I'll come on to that. So you can improve things by adding wildflower seed. Here's your local supplier. I'll do a plug. But you don't have to do that. If you've got areas where your biodiversity is already rich, there's already something in the soils. And the tests we were doing were around Blandford town itself. So this is the middle of, this is boring Blandford. This is 100 meters from Lidl, up in Blandford. So this is Holland Way. And Holland Way is all based on chalk soils. And no wildflowers have flowered there for years, other than daisies and a few dandelions. But when you move on to cut and collect, the poor things that have been smothered or cut every month suddenly get a chance to do something. And because it's under a lower fertility system, those wildflowers are growing at 8-10 inches high, no threat to anybody, and a massive pollinator source. And so this is just what was a dull mown verge in an urban environment that's suddenly become a highway, a beeline, if you like, within the town. Really, really easy to do in some areas where it's already good. And then we've also got opportunities to do something. This is now after 5 years of cut and collect on the Blandford bypass, which is a main road, A road, with wide visibility splays. This site is now a county wildlife site because of the number of notable plants, chalk plants that are now on that site. And it's absolutely chocker with marble white butterflies and meadow browns and gatekeepers and 5-spot burnets and 6-spot burnets. And it's just chocker with everything. There are pyramidal orchids growing right up to the curb edge. And when the guys do the strip, that 1 meter strip, they lift the cutter and move over them. But why don't you? Because it's so obvious to do that, isn't it? So that's just a lovely little touch. But anyway, it's about 11 hectares now of new county wildlife site. Not only that, the Dorset Wildlife Trust, who maintain that scheme, know that that management system will continue because it's now locked into it, because that's the cheapest way to maintain that system. Right, let's just come on to a little bit about publicity. It's really important to carry the public with you, and I'll be talking more with the councils in their individual sessions about how we do that. But it is very important. Most people are wedded to having amenity grass mown somewhere between, I don't know, 3, 5, 7. I was in Hackney Borough Council in London, where they mow 22 times a year. So not surprisingly, the public have become locked into the expectation that their grass gets mown 22 times a year. That is absolutely unsustainable. They recognise that. And for them to move to something where they're not having to cut anything like that is going to be a big change. I always say start small. Start with the easy bits, the low-hanging fruit. And you'll find places where you can start this cut and collect, prove to yourself it works, and then move on with that. But having the public support is absolutely critical. And you won't always get it. There will be people who will lie in front of the mower because they want it cut. But it's about balancing those who are saying, no, we're really concerned about the biodiversity crisis we're in. We want land for pollinators in our urban areas. When I go and buy my newspaper and milk, I want to be able to see bees and common butterflies as I walk through. So it's about balancing public demand then. Previously, we only ever got criticism. At least now we get some compliments. So, you'll never satisfy all people all the time. One of the main issues is disposal. And again, I'll be dealing with more of this with councils in my discussions over the next couple of days. But disposal, if you have to take these arisings, these cuttings, and take them to a licensed tip that might be several miles away or many miles away, that will bust the economics of this. It will not work. So don't even start there. You need to be able to dispose of those arisings effectively where you've cut them, very, very close to where you've cut them. And that is actually less of a challenge than you think when you ask the staff to find spaces for that. That's not going to happen on a main road between, in a little triangle of 10 square meters of grass. That's probably not going to happen right there, is it? You're not going to be able to dump it right on the side of the road. But there will always be, on highway land, areas of highway that have been improved, that have got a planting scheme, that have got hedgerows or tree plantings, where you can use that material as a mulch. And that is perfectly legal to do so. Whether you get a waste exemption or you don't get a waste exemption, no, it's up to you as an authority. Our legal advisors in Dorset Council says, don't bother, we don't think you need it. Such trivial quantities are not into waste exemptions. So we've never done it, but I know some authorities, they're concerned about that. And in its case, talk to the agency, get an exemption for mulching for that cut and collect. But so this is not far from Lidl. This is a bit of elm scrub that's grown up. boom, out goes a few cubic meters of grass cuttings every now and again. But remember the system that you're working with. As you reduce fertility, the amount of grass that you ever have to cut gets less. So you have less and less and less arisings as time goes on. It's a great system, this. We should all be doing it. Right, and there's a slide just from this year. This is after 3 years of cut and collect. This piece of boring verge in the middle of Blandford was last cut on the 26th of June, and that photograph was taken on the 19th of October, despite it having peed with rain since the middle of September. That shows you the power of reducing fertility. You've got all the right conditions: warmth, light, reasonable sunshine, rainfall, and yet still that grass does not grow to a point at which it needs mowing. That's because you're now under a low fertility system that's controlling grass growth. Now you can start doing more interesting things. Ah, boy, I've been talking with the Landscape Institute recently, and I hope that we can make progress. Why are we forever putting, I don't know, amenity grass mixes on amenity grassland? It's just like, that's what we're locked into. The words align: amenity grass mix, amenity grassland. Why not bird's foot trefoil? That's got 140 different species of insect associated with it in this country, and I bet there's a good chunk of those in Scotland. So this is a verge in Buckfast Abbey, and the head gardener there put it in there for the bees. Fantastic. Don't tell me that doesn't look anything other than absolutely amazing. And also think of when that was taken, September 2018. Even in Scotland, there was a drought here, was there not, last year? And it was a hell of a drought. And most grass verges dried up and looked terrible. Not in Buckfast. That was the verge when I turned up there in September after 5 months of dry weather. The great thing about bird's foot trefoil, as opposed to grasses, is its root system is 3 times as deep as a grass root system. It will find its nutrients and moisture from wherever it wants. And that also starts to talk about carbon storage. Wildflowers, by and large, with more complex root systems than grasses, store much more carbon below ground. So we might come to that in the discussion. Anyway, for those who are interested in the figures, we've done the biodiversity bit. The biodiversity is assured. You move on to cut and collect, you will increase biodiversity. The bit that's less convincing to some is about cost. Buying a cut and collect machine and a trailer is at least 1.5 times as expensive as replacing an existing mower. So a standard John Deere ride-on that would whiz around an urban environment, 18 grand. To get this there, it's about 36,000, including its trailer. So when I needed to purchase that within a council where the budgets were declining, I needed to produce a business plan. And don't worry about the details, but by and large, I produced a business plan. The business plan said, here's the cost of the mower. Here's the amount by which I reckon we're going to be able to reduce the amount of mowing after 5 years. And remember, this was at the start of the trials, so it was an utter guess. There's no science in this whatsoever. It is just, what do we reckon we can realistically get away with? Well, if we could effectively pay for the mower within 5 years, then that's a pretty good deal. Most businessmen work on a, 7 to 10 year return on investment? Is that right? Any economists in here? I don't know, 7 to 10 years sounds reasonable. So we reckon 5 years was a good guess. So that means, if you work through the calculations, if we could reduce from 6 mowings a year to 4 mowings a year over 5 years, the cumulative saving would add up to the cost of the mower and the trailer. Boom, sold. Gave me my mower and trailer. Fantastic, we had a chance to do a trial. So, and remember, compare that with the business case for just replacing the existing cut and leave mower. There's no saving at all. It's just a sheer replacement. So actually, you can set up cut and collect as a business case opportunity, and I would strongly recommend that. So what happened in reality? It's always nice to know, so what's your evidence, Phil? What happened? This happened. In reality, in the second year of cut and collect, which was 2018, which was a rather dry year, rather than moving from 6 cuts a year over 5 years to 4 cuts a year, it moved very dramatically from 6 cuts a year to 2 cuts in 2018. The effect we'd undercooked the business plan, basically. The effect was very, very dramatic. So here are all the villages in North Dorset, and those are the dates when the guys and the girls came back to say we've mown there. Because you need those dates, because those are the ones, when you get a complaint in, you say, no, we definitely came and cut those villages on this date. So that log has to be filled in. So the first cut in the second year of cut and collect was in May. Normally it would be in April. And the second cut was not until the end of the summer. Now, it was a particularly dry summer. And what we've done is effectively move from an output-based, where you pay on the basis of mowing once a month, to an outcome-based, as you only mow when it needs to be mown. And so effectively that end of year mowing was a tidy up. That was because it was a particularly dry year. What's happened in 2019 is they've moved to 3 cuts a year. So they did one in May, one in end of July, and they're just about finishing one now, most of that in North Dorset. So basically in 3 years, we've moved from 6 cuts a year to a maximum of 3, and sometimes you might get away with 2. So that saving is very substantial. Now, what do you do with that saving? And that's a real issue. Is that staff out on their Todd, or is that staff doing more effective things? In Dorset, I was very keen to make sure that, given the plethora of work there is to do in countryside services, that actually we redirect staff to doing more interesting things in their lives. And so what we did, we'd already got a system where we're able to monitor the amount of complaints there are on the rights of way network. That's the big Cinderella service in rights of way, because there is no statutory funding for it. There's lots of funding for filling potholes. Oh yeah, no problem at all. But for mending stiles and keeping the brambles back and the rest of it on the rights of way network, nothing. So if staff can be redirected from mowing grass to mending rights of way, we're onto a winner. So if you look at the lines, the rights of way jobs are in red. Okay. And that is very slowly increasing over the years. So that's the number of jobs that are logged online on the online system. Our ability to meet those jobs is in the green line. And as you can see, we started cut and collect in 2014. And effectively, we got to a position in 2018 where the staff now are able to more than cope with the number of jobs that are coming in for the very first time ever. And that is a clear demonstration, in my view, of that power to be able to move people from cutting grass all the time to doing something more useful, such as mending the rights of way and encouraging people to be more active on the rights of way network. Now, that whole system was part of, and again, I'll be dealing with that more with the councils, is how do we get to that? I was charged with very substantial savings across my service. And could see the opportunity to make just those over a reasonable period. And so I started off with a budget of just under £1 million for road verge maintenance. That's across the whole county, including the rural network with the contractor. And through a combination of reviewing the contract and operational rules of that policy moving towards low fertility, and that sort of benefits of doing it, we've managed to get the budget down to nearly a third of what it was over 5 years. And that is absolute, I mean, it is staggering. I didn't know, you never know what you're starting out on, but you've ended up with this fantastic ability to save money and deliver biodiversity at the same time. And the thing that slightly surprises me is, why are people not kind of going, we need to do this straight away? Because it's really hard. It's really hard to persuade people to make that investment. We all have different ways of making investment, and then to get the public on your side to be able to manifest that. It's really hard, but others are managing it. And I'll just give you that one example because it's a very recent one. And this is from Ennis over in County Clare in the west of Ireland. Now, for those of you who know the west of Ireland, the Burren is the most staggering area for wildflowers ever. Absolutely amazing. If you've never been to the Burren, that should be your next holiday next year. But the whole landscape around there is limestone. And I think local people knew there were quite a lot of limestone flowers on their roundabouts, but they were constantly being mown, 7 cuts a year. And on 3 roundabouts this year, they said, just going to cut and leave it, as opposed to cut and mulch, which is what was there. And they've calculated by how much they have made savings just on those roundabouts. So it is possible to do. And I would urge others to go there and do it. Now, almost all of this, some of the examples that I've shown today, plus other examples from around the country, are sat within Plant Life's new Managing Grassland Road Verges guidance document. And I'd urge you to read it. It's all online, it's all free. There are printed copies coming at some point or other for those of you who would like that, but they're not available yet. I've worked on that, as have the country agencies. So Transport Scotland have been on the steering group, Highways England, Kia, Skanska, the major managing agents for those things. And Scottish Wildlife Trust, there's a range of different organisations. Natural England have been working on there, SNH. Really good to see. And this guidance effectively replaces the Design Manual for Roads and Bridges Wildflower Handbook that was within the landscape section. So this is the kind of up to date. Not that I think there was something massively wrong with what was in that handbook. It's just that it didn't have the kind of case studies that I think we've got available to us these days. So it's a document I commend to you for this is not me standing up here and proselytizing, preaching to you about what you should be doing. This is these are hard-nosed people who don't just listen to Phil Sterling, so it's always worth it. And so I come to my conclusions. And what I say is that this is actually, what we've got in front of us is an opportunity to do something that's really easy technically. It's actually remarkably simple to get to the position where we can design in wildflowers into our schemes and we can lower fertility. It's easy to do ecologically because we're working with that grain of nature. The difficulty is in getting everything aligned to achieve it. So that's getting a political alignment, getting public support, getting offer support, and indeed then investment to achieve it. But it is possible. We have shown it's possible. And I leave you with I left Dorset Council 18 months ago. This spring, they have just invested £100,000 in 3 new grillos and trailers because they are now rolling out that trial in North Dorset has been so successful at saving money that they want that writ across the rest of the county in the urban areas. So that's the power of this, is without me standing up there as the boss saying this is something we should be doing, they're doing it because it's the right thing to do economically, and it's delivering political mileage, and it's delivering biodiversity gain. And so I leave you with that saying, this is a system that should work anywhere in Britain. It should work anywhere in Northern Europe. And I commend it to you, and I will help you get there if I can. Thank you. Yeah, of course.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay at the back? Sorry if it was quiet before. We're going to open up for questions just now. We've run slightly over in time, so that's 11:30. We'll maybe go for about 15 minutes, and then we'll head outside for more teas and coffees. So if anyone wants to ask any questions, I can come round with this microphone and get started. Oh, yeah.
Hello, thanks. Really, really interesting talks. I was just wondering, was there any stats or numbers on how much wildflower meadow was increased in the areas that you worked from what was grassland to sort of classed as wildflower?
That's a good question. No, we haven't done it. I think it's something where I would love to be able to quantify what we are achieving. I think, you can see it driving around, but it would be lovely to be able to kind of publish a British Wildlife magazine paper, wouldn't it, or something which said, here's what we used to have, which was dull grassland. We've now got X hectares achieved. What I would say is that actually it probably doesn't matter if you get onto the system. If you can get yourself from where you are now to moving onto a cut and lift system, then everything will improve. And we've just, I mean, I'm still part of that team, but working in a different organisation, got to the stage where the Dorset Wildlife Trust have now decided to abandon their conservation road verges scheme. So that was 120 road verges, which were all notified for their wildlife value, all had a specific prescription for the cutting regime that was never implemented. And as a result, over the 25 years where I was their ecologist, the quality of those road verges declined to the point of non-existence because they were just turning into, I don't know, hogweed areas. The point now is, for every verge that you can get a cut and lift mower onto, you have the potential to convert it from a boring verge into something that is much more interesting. So Dorset Wildlife Trust have taken a rather pragmatic view of saying, we're going to abandon this, and what we want is to be able to see and encourage you to get out there as council, and every flat verge you can get a mower onto, convert that into a wildflower meadow over time. And so it's more a system change than it is a kind of area by area change.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Councillor Colin Pike for Aberdeenshire Council. I think the presentations this morning have been absolutely excellent. But you only have to go 400 yards from this building, and as I drove in here this morning, great big slew diggers putting lovely lush brown topsoil on roadside verges. How do we get that message into the construction industry, and how do we change it? Across the northeast of Scotland, we've got huge house building programs. Many of those schemes, because of the economy, have stuttered at the moment. But how do we get those construction companies to actually start looking at biodiversity? They all advertise, oh, we've planted 100 trees on this development, but I think there needs to be a much greater interaction with them. How do we do that, please?
It needs a few more of me, that's for sure. There's a limit to what I can do, but where I am working, I'm working with Taylor Wimpey in East Anglia, and that is with a view to ensuring that all of their new developments, I say working with, I went to speak to them a month ago, and they were saying, we absolutely need you on board to help us get to where we want to be. East Anglia is one of 26 sections of Taylor Wimpey nationally. It's about establishing some good practice somewhere that others can benefit from. So that's the one thing. And I would also commend to you the RSPB, who are doing some fantastic work with Barratt Homes in Aylesbury, and with ID Verdi, who are a green space management organisation nationally, and they're starting in the London Borough of Bromley, but with the idea of rolling that out. And with CEMEX as a national, they have now a 10-year relationship with CEMEX, where RSPB have kind of sold their soul to the devil, if you like, and they're helping CEMEX get from first eye of where they can start to develop through to restoration, helping the industry develop in a sustainable way. Question about what is sustainable, but they're helping them to secure the biodiversity gains along the route. So I think there are opportunities to do that. From my point of view, as well as this road verge document, which I think is important, and I think for those of you who know it and can pass that on and ensure that Transport Scotland, they've signed up to it, but are actually using it, that will be helpful. But Highways England are very keen. They are really, really progressive. I've had 3 of their project managers and project teams to see the Weymouth Relief Road. And like it or not, whether you want the Stonehenge tunnel underneath that monument and that landscape, if that scheme gets the funding, the Weymouth Relief Road will look like a postage stamp in comparison with what Highways England are going to produce. We're talking of 7 miles of road verges that will all be like the Weymouth Relief Road, and 100 hectares of off-site compensation. So if we can achieve some monster scale enhancements, then those, I think, set the benchmark, and that weedy little Dorset becomes kind of an afterthought, and that we see national organisations and developers taking that on board. That's where I want us to go, But you know, we are a bit like one of the ladder at the minute. So I absolutely share your concern, but I'm doing my bit, but I wish others would help in doing it.
Thank you.
We find that the soil and the stuff that's being moved around on site is being moved by engineers, not by people with ground in ecology or particularly knowledge of the plants that might grow there, and they'll work to the specifications of the job. So I think that what we need to do is find ways of being able to give them a specification that says how much topsoil they should use, or whether they should use it at all. And then they need to find ways of doing that, ways of, for instance, dealing with excess topsoil, which is quite often a problem on any site. And I think if they're given guidance to do that, then that will help a great deal in achieving the sort of biodiversity objectives.
Giles, that just reminded me, the Construction Industry Research Information Association, Syria, are now into phase 2 of what they're calling their linear infrastructure, green infrastructure enhancement advisory notes. And I have had an input to that, including the Waynes Relief Road and one other example of where the detailed specification has been handed on to Syria. When they produce those guidance notes, that is, you know, the kind of standard that industry would expect to be working to. But who knows when that's going to happen, and who knows how popular it's going to be when it happens. But it's there for the taking.
Councillor George Carr, Aberdeenshire Council. I was just wondering if you could comment about the current drive. We're hearing it very clearly with elections going on, about tree planting. This is the be-all, end-all. However, I'm not just altogether sure that this is the right way to go forward. We should maybe be planting trees in the Amazon. I'm not sure if we should be planting extensive areas of trees in the UK, which can sometimes sterilise areas. Now, some trees are good for pollinators, but they've got a small window when that happens. What's your view about the balance between trees and your cut and remove, which I think has got some merit? Where's the balance here?
Okay, right, a really, really interesting question. How perceptive. Very nice to hear a councillor talking about that. My view is that I have to say I am none too keen on vast amounts of tree planting. I think if we're tree planting to sequester carbon, we need to think of carbon as not just something that is stored above ground. We need to think of below ground storage of carbon. That is absolutely critical, and it is abundantly clear from the research that Cranfield Institute, I'm not sure whether this institute, but also does its own research on carbon. I bet it does. But certainly the Cranfield Institute has demonstrated the phenomenal value of permanent grassland to carbon sequestration. And that's because permanent grassland does not get kind of disturbed. It doesn't get picked up and destroyed. So the carbon that gets into the below ground system there is locked up. And that's also true of peatlands, as you well know, bogs and the rest of it. So I would say that please do not plant trees into permanent grassland, because the Cranfield Institute also show that when you plant trees into permanent grassland, it releases that carbon. So that carbon gets released to the effect that at some point or other, when it becomes woodland, it has a lower below carbon storage than the equivalent area of permanent grassland. And it's not until you get an above ground carbon storage that then covers what's lost below, do you start having net benefit. And then it's all the question of, well, what do you do with that wood? If that wood remains as wood in that site, which locks it up forever, then only when those trees finally die in 200 to 300 years' time does that carbon start getting released. What are the chances of that? We're going to use that, pillage it, rape it, build with it, burn it, whatever we're going to do with it. And I very much doubt whether it's going to sit there. Maybe we'll run out of food and cut it down and plough it. I don't know what we're going to do with it, but my guess is that above ground carbon is something that we will use as a resource rather than rather than stick there where we should be dealing with them.
Well, Scotland's lost most of its natural vegetation. That is true of the lowland wildflower meadows, where Phil mentioned the figure of 97%, which I think is probably generally true of Scotland as well as of England. But also in the uplands, the natural vegetation of most of the uplands of Scotland would be trees. And they've been lost over hundreds of years through felling, but particularly through grazing and through management of so much of our countryside for shooting, for leisure purposes. So it's both agricultural and it's shooting for leisure. And there's we look at the rolling hills, and people say how wonderful and natural they look, but in fact that's an artifact of human intervention over a very long period. So there's a very good case in terms of biodiversity for reforesting a great deal of the countryside in Scotland, and that will bring huge biodiversity gains as well, I think. So I would say I think there's a very strong case for planting more trees. Much of the effort in Scotland has actually gone into afforestation for timber production, which is another great need that we have for more timber. So I think the targets that we have is 10,000 hectares of planting per year, which have actually been realised over the last few years, and quite possibly increasing that figure are quite justified in terms of biodiversity and timber production.
Question?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but the colour was good. Yet another question from a councillor. Obviously, we are in the sort of interface with public opinion, and with the sort of new regimes, as it were, or maintenance regimes that the councils are very, splendidly trying to achieve and create around some of the urban areas, the housing schemes and so forth, should I say. One of the issues that's coming my way is one, the increase in deer ticks caused by the long grass. And this is terrible. This is a public health hazard. It's all your fault. And also hay fever, the pollen and all the rest of it. And the whole street, every child has got really bad hay fever. And guess what? How do we overcome this?
Well, I mean, very interesting point. Those are very real for some people. I mean, nobody's going to be, if your child is walking down the street and suddenly has an asthma attack, I mean, that's very real and very now. So we do have to have an answer for that. I mean, some of it is about, let's deal with deer ticks first of all, is that what I'm not suggesting is that you let the grass grow really long and just allow ticks and the rest of it abandon, if you like. What I'm after in urban areas is similarly neatly managed grassland, that maybe it is very slightly longer, but that you're in control of that ecosystem for the first time in your management lives, and that you can cut it to the length you want. But the point about it is when you do cut it, you're maintaining the biodiversity that's within it. Now, some of that may be very short. If you want to plant and maintain a bird's foot trefoil grass verge, you can do that, and it'll have common blue butterflies and lots of bees on it, but it won't have any more ticks on it than any length of grass for the equivalent, but it will have more biodiversity. So I think it's about being in control of the ecosystem and maintaining long grass where you want long grass and short grass where you want short grass, but making it work harder for biodiversity. The second point is about public health, and we're at the start of understanding how to affect population scale health. The evidence that I'm reading at the moment is about how a more biodiverse environment leads to a less reactive human population. By reactive, I mean with lower rates of inflammatory disease, of asthma, of skin problems and the rest of it. And that's to do partly, it's at least a link with how diverse our skin biome, gut biome, lung biome, eye, head, whatever it is, biomes that we've got. The millions of bacteria and fungi that exist with us every day. 1 hour spent in a more diverse environment biologically produces a more diverse gut biome. I must say that wrong. Fortunately, I stopped that screen. But you know, and 1 hour in a very sterile environment produces a less diverse biome. So you know, does that equate and does that provide an answer for the child that's got an asthma attack? No, it doesn't. But does it say at a population scale we need to think hard about what we're doing with our environments and give people the best chance at a population scale? Yes, it does, and that's where we, as you know, and my role in the public authority is very much about producing things that are trying to lower the risk of people with more expensive health interventions. And green space management is one of our keys, and a very cheap key, to be able to lift the population into a healthier future. So there's some population scale things set against the individual.
Yeah, I think we are trying to change the way that we manage these spaces, and I think Phil alluded to it in his talk that there's quite often some resistance to this. That people are very used to what they have, to what the local authority is doing to manage it, it fits with people in various ways, whether they're walking their dogs or using areas of open grass, and they're just used to it that way. And very often when there's a change to that, there's sowing some wildflowers or cutting grass less often. There's quite often resistance, and we know that just one or two people complaining can be a huge headache for the local authority or for the local council, and it can be very difficult to deal with that. And quite often, it's that person who's complaining who's heard and who gets their way, whereas the rest of the population is disadvantaged by that. And I think that there's quite a sort of interpretation and education and working together approach, which is much more productive. And places like Edinburgh, for example, have adopted that approach. We've got real support in quite formal areas. So, for instance, the Meadows in Edinburgh has had some wildflower areas, and they've been managed by local groups. They've had interpretation and a lot of consultation, and they generally get a good positive response from the local community without a lot of complaints.
Okay. Sorry, I think we're going to have to cut it off there just for time.